Right. Hopefully they'll... So I have to apologise right at the start. I've got a very gravelly voice. It's not because I've got COVID. Apparently got some sort of nodule on my vocal cords, which makes speaking a little bit more challenging at the moment. So please bear with me. I'm hoping that my voice will hold up and that you can hear me okay. So do I click for the first slide, or Peter, the lovely Peter's going to put the first slide up. So I'm going to talk to you really at Jimmy's request at quite short notice. I've been associate director, although I'm a board level director, but my title's associate director at University Hospital Sussex now for about 18 months, and I've been a deputy DIPC for quite some time before that. And I regularly sent Jimmy emails saying, what do you think about X? So he asked me, he said, would you mind talking about some of these odd problems that you keep presenting in the world of infection control, decontamination, some of it water related, some of it can be ventilation related, and some of it cleaning related. And I'm hoping my slides are going to come up. I've been messing them around because I kept adding pictures because some of the things that you said today were absolutely things that rang through, and I've just got to add. So I've called it Trials and Tribulations of the DIPC, and it isn't, obviously, I'm not a Teletubby. Well, might be a bit tubby, but not Teletubby. But I just thought it was nice. So let's see if I can get that to work. Right, so what is a DIPC? The DIPC role is the Director for Infection Prevention and Control, and it's a role that's been around in the UK now for probably about 15 years. And it's required under the Health and Social Care Act that all registered providers have a Director for Infection Prevention and Control, and that's someone to take the sort of board level responsibility. They're not required to be an executive director, but they are required to have sort of immediate access, if you like, to the chief executive to raise any concerns and any problems. And these are sort of some of the things that we have that responsibility for. So meeting all the targets that are set by the government, by NHSE, making sure that we're meeting all the relative standards that we need to in our hospitals. So whether it's decontamination, water safety, the built environment, all of those different aspects. We also sort of supervise the infection prevention team to make sure that we've got the right input. Although I'd sort of take a level back from the team, and I let my team do their things, and I try and sort of direct activity. And we make decisions, and sometimes it's very easy to think, right, you know, there's a guideline, there's a process, there's a rule, and you must follow it. But working hospitals, and I am talking primarily from an acute hospital perspective, they are very challenging. They're just very challenging places. Ju said to me yesterday when we were at dinner, what's your biggest challenge? And you know, at the moment, balancing what comes through the front door with the lack of what goes out the back door, and then trying to keep everyone safe in the middle is hugely challenging. You know, the number of medically fit for discharge patients that are not going out into the community, the sheer volume of patients that are coming through our EDs, and you know, that lack of beds in the middle makes things really, really difficult. So sometimes we have to make decisions not just based on the standards, but we have to use our judgment, we have to be pragmatic, and we have to look at the best interests of the patients. So for an example, you know, bed spacing, 2.5 meters per in between a bed space, that's lovely. But when you've got an ED where the trolleys are literally touching each other in the corridor, what is better? Is it better to move a patient into a ward and overcrowd the ward a little bit? Or do you leave those patients to be exposed to each other in the ED? a lot of quite difficult things. So we're dealing with complex issues. So I'm hoping that sometimes I press the panic button. Well, I try not to panic, but I do the, I'm going too fast. Hey, you, Jimmy. Honestly, Jimmy is one of my go-to people. So these are a few of the scenarios that I'm going to just touch on, and there are a few, and I'm not necessarily saying they're the right approach, and I'm quite welcome to suggestions, and hopefully it will engender some questions. So, Juice, you talked about Vim carbapenemase. So this is some photos taken from the Millennium Wing, clues in the title of when it was built, and this is at Brighton. And we've just actually this week, I think, have lost or are about to lose a patient who got a sternal wound infection with a Vim carbapenemase. And we'd found exactly the same Vim carbapenemase 10 years ago in a different building in our blocks. And if you look at these pictures, and apologies, some of you are over in the corner, this is the cardiothoracic intensive care unit. And I have to say, it's a little bit like putting a quart into a pint pot. There is far too much in it. It's far too crowded. We've isolated this Vim carbapenemase from the drains. I think there's a picture of the macerator there. Look at the lovely hand towels just sort of above it. That macerator would take your hand off, and we've asked for it to replace 3 months ago, and it's still there. This was my favourite. This was the clean utility room. You can look at all the sterile equipment stored right next to the sink. And I think this bit at the end, this is the only bit of counter left in that room, which is where nurses should be making up IV drugs. Actually, the storeman sort of uses it, which is why so that means there's nowhere for them to make up IV drugs other than in the bays. And this is just a general shot of the unit. This is a patient's bed, and again, stuff stored next to the bed. But, this is real world what we're trying to deal with. I have suggested taking that sink out, and in fact, going forward, when we were doing new builds, I'm actually saying, please don't put a sink in the clinical utility room, the clean utility room. You should not be going in there with dirty hands. You can use alcohol while you're in there. If you need a sink, have one nearby outside, but you don't need one in the room. The problem I've got is the HTM does not say that. And until the HTM catches up, the people that are designing buildings, whether they're the architects or whether they're capital projects, keep arguing with me. And it's a bit the same with water and disposal. You mentioned the study that showed only 4% of people wash their hands at a sink. And we're constantly telling people not to put things down the sinks. But we don't provide anywhere else for them to use. So the best they can do is throw it, a patient's wash bowl, throw the water down the toilet perhaps, but then you risk splashback from the toilet onto you. Otherwise, you have to carry it to the sluice. And on some wards, there might just be one sluice, and it might be quite some distance. So you can't really blame people for wanting to put it down the nearest hand wash basin. Same with the coffee cup. You want to put it in the bin, but you don't want to put it in because it was hospital tea, and it wasn't very nice, and you didn't drink it. So you've got half a cup of it. So what do? You tip it down the sink before you put the empty cup in the bin. So I think for the hospital of the future, we should be looking at disposal sinks throughout clinical areas, judiciously positioned, that are available for people to use. But again, until the HTM catches up, so we can listen. I've been listening about waterless ICU now for a long time, but trying to get it actually enacted is really difficult. And we're about to open a brand new 55-bed ICU, which got far too many hand wash basins in it, because it was designed some years ago. So it's a challenge. Then new equipment for decontamination. So this is me having my nodule looked at last week with a nasendoscope. And I'm booked for surgery in June. Fun, thrills and excitement. But we've got, I'm in one of the hospitals I cover is Brighton. And many of you will know that Brighton has the only Green MP in the country. And Brighton is a really hardline sustainability sort of capital. So we've got big push for sustainable options, and people are particularly looking at decontamination. And one of our colleagues is, some of you will have been at the October meeting, is a guy called Mood Bhuta. He's a professor of ENT surgery, and he's doing a lot of very high level work with the government on sustainability. So he's got some great ideas, but he's done the classic. A few weeks ago, I got copied into an email chain quite late on about a new decontamination for nasendoscopes. It was in the department. They were going live with the trial next week. They thought they'd better let me know. Hang on a minute, mate, you know. So we had to look at this, and it was a reasonable request. They had spent something like £110,000 in the last few months on repairs to our nasendoscopes. And we are sending them all to sterile services, which is quite a long trek from where ENT mainly happens. And it was the chemicals that were damaging the scopes. And I've handled them, and you can see how, you know, the nice black shiny plastic of the handles is made horrible. So you can understand where they're coming from with this. Oh, sorry, I've gone backwards for some reason. So he'd suggested the UVC. And we had this company that had brought this lovely bit of kit in. And the problem with it is it's not in any of our guidelines. So we all know that ideally we send things to sterile services so they go through an automated, validated process. The wipes are an acceptable alternative for nasendoscopes, although a lot of people don't like them. And at Brighton, we'd made a decision some years ago, we would go with best practice, therefore we were sending to SSD, but we were seeing the issues with the scopes. So the company came in, and I have to say, I like this idea. This looks like a really sensible idea. They want us to clean the scope down to get rid of any gubbins, and let's face it, there's not a lot of gubbins on a nasendoscope, and it's quite a simple bit of kit. It's not got a channel. And then hang it in a cabinet. Hang on, we've gone past. I'm not very good with this thingy. I'm going backwards the wrong way, sorry. Can someone help me with this? Have I gone? Oh, I'm giving you all just turn your back for a minute. So the cabinet's on here, sorry. And it's the same one that Juice showed. It's a tall cabinet, and you literally hang the scope. There's like a glass bit here, which is made of crystal, so that it doesn't cause any shadowing. So you wipe the scope clean, you put it in the cabinet, and... Oh, right, so I've been up and down, so that's why I'm doing it wrong. Duh. So you hang it in there, 1 minute, it zaps the scope. But what I was worried about was, did it meet the right relevant standards? And I mentioned this to Richard and his lovely wife yesterday, because it's not always easy to know what standard you should be measuring something against. And, you know, there are standards for disinfectants, but this isn't really a disinfectant as in the normal way, but nor is it a room disinfectant either. And just trying to sort of piece together, what should I be measuring this against so that I can say, is this safe or isn't it safe? And, you know, I was looking at different bits of documentation. I went to the people that make 3-stage wipes that will remain nameless, but I looked at what log reductions they were looking at, because the thing that was concerning our microbiologists was that it said that the validation test only went to 4.5 log reduction for yeasts and viruses. And so we were concerned, well, is that enough? And it's trying to get those answers. As I say, as a day-to-day practitioner, that make it a little bit more challenging. And, you know, it's not in any of the good practice standards. There is something in the HTM that says about innovation, and I kind of think this falls under innovation. But I looked back, and Bart's were using something similar since 2015, a different manufacturer. And I contacted Monica. I don't know if she's here today, but Monica was their decon lead. And she sent me something, and actually it had been validated by good old Tina Bradley, bless her. And she'd signed this thing off, but only for bacteria, for gram-positive, gram-negative bacteria. So there was still this question over yeasts and viruses and fungi with respect particularly to oncology patients. So I was so relieved to hear you say that this is actually good. And we discussed it at our decontamination group meeting, and we're going to go ahead with the trial because it all said and done, this looks like a really good way forward. They wipe the scope with a microfiber cloth and then they put it in the cabinet and zap it. It doesn't leave the department, it increases the turnover, and it minimises the damage. So it's balancing all those risks together. I think this is probably a good thing. But the standards, going back to standards, this is a picture. It's quite an old picture now. And I started at a hospital back in 2007. And the very first week I got there, now bear in mind this is a particular centre of excellence for cardiothoracics and respiratory. It will again remain nameless. But I went up to the bronchoscopy department. And I walked into the bronchoscopy department and I nearly had an apoplexy because I saw this. So I said to a colleague, what is that? That's where we decontaminate our bronchoscopes. And I was like, you what? This is 2007. I mean, I'd seen Sidex when I started in infection control in 1993, and even then it was kind of banned or on the way out. So I asked what the chemical was, and they said it was something called, I think it was called NuGen. And I asked about it, and they said, well, this guy came in and he sort of mixed up this thing, and we can use it for a whole month. My apoplexy went even worse. So I rang, many of you know, dear departed, I'm thinking of all the dear departed, so Paul Holland. So Paul Holland was my SSD manager when I was at Kingston. I rang Paul and I said, Paul, tell me, this doesn't sound right. And he's like, nah, definitely not right. So then I rang Peter Hoffman, and Peter came, and these are actually the photos that Peter took in, this would have been early October 2007. Needless to say, we stopped that day. We had to put in a different chemical, but at least a validated chemical for a few weeks while we got some automated washer disinfectors in as a priority. But the thing that made me laugh was they were told that this was validated and it met the standard. But it turned out when we looked at it, it was a food standard. Who knew? So, as I say, it's very easy for people in the clinical environment to be misled. This is another thing that I came across in the last year. This is in a PFI unit. It's an endoscopy room. It was blatantly unfit for purpose. And the reason that I went up there in the first place was I received this sheet of paper, and I don't know where Andrea's sitting. Andrea saw the piece of paper. And it had RO failures, like significant RO failures, going back to January 2021. And this was in some point in 2022. And again, you know, as an IPC person, I don't know what is the significance of the RO failure, because, okay, the RO water was not nice. It had all sorts of and everything in it. But it was then going through filters, and actually the final rinse water was clear. So again, it's about that dilemma of, is that okay, or isn't it okay? As it happened, the rest of that unit is pretty gross. You know, they were doing plaster of Paris in that sink here. That was where they were decontaminating the scopes. There was clutter everywhere. We closed it. We said no. We're going to go back to sterile services, and we got rid of that unit. So we've just relocated the storage cabinet so that the scopes can be done properly. But Andrea and colleagues came and had a look at that for me, and we felt that that was the right thing to do. Then there was this, which we came across, and again, we've got sessions on dental tomorrow, which I'm really looking forward to. But dental chairs, who knew they were so complicated? And how do you work out what bit goes to where, and what bit matters, and what bit doesn't? And again, you know, this sort of thing, you could see the biofilm in the lines. I mean, it was gross. But as an IPC person, it's very difficult to know what is what. And trying to actually Google and find out the sort of running structure of how a dental chair is supposed to work, it's really, really difficult. And I think something that CSC should do is provide an idiot's guide to this is a dental chair and what you should do for it. And then we go to dialysis. So this was one of my big nightmares recently. So this is what the back of a dialysis unit should look like. And you've got, well, I say should look like, this one's an open drain one. The better ones do not have an open drain. But you have a supply for the water, and then you have a supply for disposal. So this is the sort of thing that I was looking at on a unit. And I've sort of put the different things, but this is the supply of clean RO water coming in. And immediately under here is the drain hole. And there was effluent and body fat and all sorts of stuff. Now, I was a renal nurse over 30 years ago, and I never ever even took notice of things like this. So I dare say some of them maybe haven't. But these are some close-ups of that. Now, I sent this one to Jimmy. I sent him a couple of photos, and I think the response was something along the lines of, please tell me that's not a real live, like a real working renal unit. Jimmy, I'm sorry, but yes, it is. And there's about 60 chairs like this. It's a main renal unit. I have, and the reason I'd originally got involved in it was, I'd questioned the open drain several months or a year ago when I got there. But then the renal team had put a business case in which was being refused to replace them. And they were like, well, you can just clean them up. Well, you can't clean that. You can't clean rust. That's just not cleanable. So they need to be replaced, and they're going to be replaced with some closed panel ones, thankfully. And talking of drains, so I'm sort of near the end now, but some of you, I lent this to Peter Hoffman, so you may have seen it before, but this is from another hospital that I worked at where we had an outbreak of Pseudomonas, and it was a 17-bedded ward, private care, oncology. So oncology patients do tend to lose a lot of hair. So maybe their drains are a bit worse than maybe somewhere else, but even so, I don't think the drains were ever being cleaned. So when we investigated, that was what came out of one of them, which I think is just, I love that picture. But we had to then take the drains apart and then take them, I think we took them to the sluice to clean them, because obviously we didn't want to be splattering whatever it was. But again, you know, when we look at the design of toilets, we've got toilets quite close to showers. We had a bit of an issue with some of our patients who wanted to connect hoses to the shower heads so they could use them over the toilet. And of course, in plumbing rules, the shower is not allowed to reach to the toilet, but they were making it and they were bringing their own bits in and connecting it all up. So we had a lot of different issues going on, some of them multicultural, but mostly they just weren't taking the drains apart to clean them. So hence my initial reaction, because we had to close this ward for about a month, and that was a big thing to do. but we'd had multiple Pseudomonas isolates from various water outlets. So my first thing was to send someone down to like home base or Waitrose to go and grab some disinfectants, and then we sort of started cleaning them and looking at different chemicals to put in. And I was really interested talking to Mike yesterday about the idea of probiotic cleaners. So I can feel some work going on there to try and address this. And then I was just going to finish with this one, because this is something that happened last week. We're moving into our new glossy £500 million building, hopefully at the end of May. And someone said to me, one of the matrons for medicine rang up. She said, "We've been told we can't move our piano because of infection control and decontamination." Now, I know that if you look inside a piano, yes, it is very dusty. But I just wanted to put it out there as my final sort of note and to strike a chord with you, because infection control gets blamed for everything. And of course, I was like, no, there's no way. It turned out it was our medical director who had decided. But it is that IPC get blamed for everything. So hopefully when they do move in, the dementia patients will be able to enjoy people playing on their piano. And I'm not having IPC blamed for that. So there was just a walk through some of the sort of things that get thrown at me in my sort of DIPC role. And thank you for listening. I don't know, is that all right? Do you want questions or not? I don't know how I'm doing for time. I'm probably over, actually.
I've just got one question, because we're going to be running a little bit over time. So unless anybody's got any question from the... Oh.
Hang on. I'm a big fan of UVC, full stop, for many applications, but bearing in mind how much UVC is required to deal with spores and fungi, are you not concerned that we're also going to damage the scopes? Because UVC is well known to also crack plastics, and it's kind of counterproductive. And I'm just curious, in the trial you're doing there, are you going to be keeping a close eye on the overdosing issues?
Yeah, we will do. But the company are being promoted by Pentax. So it was Pentax that are working with them. And I mean, one of the first questions I had was, are the scope manufacturers going to be happy to look at this? And it appears that they are. We've gone through Olympus Storts, and as I say, Pentax are sort of sponsoring the work. So yeah, I think it is something we'll be keeping an eye on. And just on the process as well, I mean, it does feel a bit nerve-wracking bringing something in that's not normal good practice. But equally, one has to look forward and you have to innovate, and this could be just the thing.
Hi, I loved your talk. Thank you very much, Suzanne Sermon-Lee. There is a bit in HBN 1401 which you might find useful, and it's if your clean prepriums are used for preparation of medicine, then it applies. And paragraph 6.38 says things should not be included where aseptic prep is carried out. And I've used that to work when for a new build to get round that very
That's
problem.
really helpful, thank you.
HBN 1401.
And what's the title of that one?
It's Pharmacy and Radio Pharmacy, Aseptic Preparation of Medicines. So, but it includes any area where aseptic preparation of medicines carried out.
Yeah, I think that's the issue, because we look at that as radio pharmacy as opposed to like the clean room on a ward, which is, used for all sorts. But yeah, I think I'll quote that, because we're fab, 1401. Thank you.
Hang on, sorry. I I know I said one question, but we're live streaming, and I'm really excited that we've actually got somebody ask a question on live streaming. So I want to ask it. So Kathy, who agrees with many of your things about HTM, she says, how can we have a recognised halfway stage between published HTMs and what will be coming next based on the new published data demonstrating improved performance and processes? Did that make sense?
Yeah, I guess. It's the age-old problem. We've been, like, the waterless ICU is a great example. We've been talking about that for a long time, but it's not there in any documentation. So other than quoting literature, I mean, maybe if someone like CSC or HIS, IPS put together a position paper that said, this is what we now recommend. But I keep hearing that NHSE are going to renew the HTMs or update them. But it seems like a long time waiting, and I'm not sure that they always involve the right people, because they need people, I think, at the ground level as well as the experts to know what's practical. Because, you know, so often we get told, do this, do that, but actually it's not workable in practice. So I think maybe a position paper from some of the learned societies might be a good way forward.
Excellent. Thank you. Round of applause.